Watching the Oscars is always a super fun time. But when a movie that you least expected to win takes home the prize, it can be pretty interesting to watch, especially if the win is a little out of pocket. Sometimes, seeing the audience's reactions and the reception afterwards can be the most exciting part. Want to know some of the strangest films that won Oscars when no one expected them to? Here are the weirdest films to ever win an Oscar. Starting out, we should probably talk about one of the most iconic Oscar moments ever. No, I'm not talking about the epic Oscar slap between two well-known actors back in 2022.
Oh, wow!
I'm talking about the time one winner came up on stage and shocked the entire audience with his acceptance speech. Back in 2003, Halle Berry was the lovely actress in charge of announcing the contenders for Best Actor. When she announced who won, it was a complete shock to the audience. Mostly because a smaller actor came out on top despite being up against some huge names in the industry. Adrien Brody won for his leading role in The Pianist, his first Academy Award. That's pretty nice, right? Good for him. He won against names like Jack Nicholson, Nicolas Cage, Michael Caine, and Daniel Day-Lewis, and he became the youngest actor to earn the award, which is all well and good. But it's not really what people remember when they think of his big win. Because when he got up on stage to accept his award, he grabbed Halle Berry's face and planted a huge non-consensual kiss on her lips. Yeah, pretty crazy, am I right?
I bet they didn't tell you that was in the gift bag.
Berry has since said that she was completely and utterly thrown for a loop at the time. The kiss was a completely spur-of-the-moment decision. It wasn't planned between either of them.
No, that was not planned. I knew nothing about it.
And if you watch the clip, you can't help but feel like if this happened today, there would be much more controversy surrounding Brody's actions. But I suppose it was a different time then. Although Halle Berry does look completely horrified by Brody's little acceptance speech, and it was a huge shock for the viewers. At the time, it was as big of a deal as the notorious Oscar slap. So long story short, it was probably one of the weirdest Oscar wins ever. But moving on to another widely unexpected turn of events, does anyone remember when Eminem won an Oscar for Best Song?
The Oscar goes to Eminem, Jeff Bass, and Luis Resto for Lose Yourself from 8 Mile.
Yeah, it was pretty out of pocket, and most of the audience was completely at a loss when it happened. If you're not super into Eminem, you might be really confused as to how he could win an Oscar, so let me explain. At the same Academy Awards, at the infamous Halle Berry kiss, Eminem was nominated for Best Song. The song in question was Lose Yourself, the song he released along with his semi-autobiographical film, 8 Mile. The movie was a pretty big deal back in 2003, with numerous critics calling it one of the best releases of the year. It was especially huge for the hip-hop genre. Having a rapper honored with an Academy Award for a rap song had never really been done before. So I know what you're probably thinking. What the hell was his acceptance speech like? Eminem isn't exactly known for being warm and polite, so what was it like when he came up on stage? Well, he actually didn't. Yup, Eminem actually didn't attend the awards ceremony. Instead, his collaborator on the track, Luis Resto, accepted the reward on his behalf.
Along with my co-writers and friends, Jeff Bass, Marshall Mathers, who couldn't be here.
Years later, in 2020, Eminem gave a surprise performance during that year's Oscars. Of course, he performed the song that originally earned him an Oscar, but why come back to perform the song that won 17 years later? And why didn't he show up in the first place? Well, after all these years, we finally have an answer. Apparently, Eminem decided not to show up because he thought he never had a chance of winning, so there was no point in going. Pretty crazy, right? He was up against some pretty huge names in both rock music and musical theater, so it does make sense. But at the end of the day, he still won and eventually got to make things right by performing years later. Honestly, that's pretty cool if you ask me. Now on to something a little more controversial. There have been a few times when people disagree on which film should take home a huge award like Best Picture. And this case is no different. In fact, this instance has only gotten more controversial as time goes on. At the 2006 Academy Awards, there were two major contenders for Best Picture. Although there were more nominees than that, these two were the top picks for the award. Everyone thought that one of them would be the winner for sure. Those two films were Brokeback Mountain and Crash, two movies that covered stories focusing on diversity and discrimination of different minorities. If you've never heard of Crash, you're in the majority. Almost no one has revisited that movie since its release, and if they have, they didn't like it that much.
It's okay.
Brokeback Mountain, on the other hand, has since become a cult classic, with the film winning awards and being internationally recognized as a top-quality movie.
And the Golden Globe goes to Brokeback Mountain.
So, which one do you think won Best Picture? If you guessed Brokeback Mountain, you're wrong.
And the Oscar goes to Crash.
The choice to award Crash with Best Picture stirred some debate at the time, but the fact that it's since aged poorly has made the disappointment with the choice last over a decade. It was by far one of the weirdest decisions for Best Picture in recent years. But while we're on the topic of Best Picture, let's talk about a movie that has only become more and more famous as time goes on. But back then, it was more of an underdog. If you've never heard of Rocky, I would assume you've been living under a rock for your entire life, because this movie is so classic. But despite critics ranting and raving about it upon its release, most people weren't completely sold on it back in the day. It sounds crazy, I know. With the film being so famous now, it's hard to believe it was ever considered less than the other options for Best Picture. Looking at the other nominees for Best Picture at the time had people in utter disbelief when Rocky won. Other nominees included Network, All the President's Men, and Taxi Driver, which are all super acclaimed films. Rocky winning Best Picture was so perfect because the movie is about being the underdog and coming out on top, which is exactly what they ended up doing. And unlike Crash, this film has only gotten better with age. So needless to say, it was a pretty solid choice for the biggest award of the night. But over the years, there have definitely been some questionable choices for the award. Not to mention, there have been all kinds of strange interactions or weird instances throughout the years. Just take Halle Berry being abruptly kissed on stage by a stranger, or Will Smith slapping Chris Rock across the face. Plus, there are always a few shockers each year, Eminem winning an Oscar, and also the time he performed were both big surprises. And although there are times when we may disagree with the Academy's choices, you can't deny their credibility and their influence over the industry. Also, it's always nice to see your favorite movie of the year or a really talented actor win an award. And at the end of the day, isn't that all we can ask for? What do you think? Those were the weirdest films to ever win an Oscar.